Alina set her coffee mug on the podium before the first student had even found a seat. She pulled up her slides, checked the clicker, and straightened the stack of graded papers she'd carry back at the end of the hour. 43 years old, and she still arrived 15 minutes early. Old habit. The kind that doesn't come from discipline so much as from knowing what it costs to be unprepared. The lecture hall filled in the way they always did. Backpacks thudding onto seats, phones disappearing reluctantly into pockets. The low murmur of 22 undergraduates pretending they weren't still half asleep at 9 in the morning. Alina let them settle. Then she clicked to her first slide and started talking. And within 2 minutes, the room had gone quiet in the way that meant they were actually listening. That part never got old. She taught comparative literature at the University of Nevada, Reno, had for 11 years. Before that, she'd been an adjunct, teaching 4 sections a semester while finishing her master's. Grading papers at the kitchen table until midnight, eating whatever was fast and cheap and required no decisions. She'd been accepted to a doctoral program in Edinburgh at 29. Full funding, 2 years, the kind of opportunity that comes once. She'd deferred it when she married Henry. Then deferred it again. Then watched the window close. She didn't talk about that much. She'd built something here instead, and what she'd built was good. Her students requested her sections specifically. Her department chair, a careful man named Theo Lindqvist, who didn't give praise lightly, had called her the most reliable voice in the department at her last review. She kept that letter in her desk drawer. Not framed. Just kept. After class, she held office hours, answered 4 emails, and ate lunch at her desk. Half a turkey sandwich and an apple, same as most Tuesdays. At 2:15, she walked across the quad toward the faculty parking lot and stopped when she heard her name. Henry was coming from the direction of Morrison Hall, his laptop bag over one shoulder. His jacket open despite the November cold the way it always was because he ran warm and never admitted it. He was tall, still lean at 45, with the kind of face that photographed well and smiled easily. People liked Henry immediately. That was the first thing she'd noticed about him 14 years ago, how a room adjusted to him. "You eat?" he asked. "At my desk." Again, he fell into step beside her. "I'm making that pasta tonight." "The one with the lemon. You don't have a faculty meeting?" Cancelled, she glanced at him. He was already looking ahead, squinting slightly in the pale afternoon light, and there was something easy and unhurried about the way he moved that she had always found steadying. He'd been at the university 6 years now. She'd been the one to recommend him for his position. Had sat in on 2 rounds of his interview process, had vouched for his scholarship when one committee member raised questions about his publication record. She'd believed in him completely. The work had borne that out. He was a good professor and a respected one, and she had never once thought to hold any of it over him. "Lemon pasta sounds good," she said. He reached over without looking at her and squeezed her hand once, briefly, before letting go. That night, the apartment smelled like garlic and citrus by the time she came out of her home office. Henry had music on low, something instrumental she half recognized, and 2 glasses of white wine already poured on the counter. She picked one up and leaned against the doorframe and watched him work the pan. "You're in a good mood," she said. "Am I allowed?" "I didn't say you weren't." He laughed, just a short sound, and shook the pan. She drank her wine. The kitchen was the part of the apartment she liked best. High ceilings, the window that faced west. The way the evening light came through it in the last hour before dark. They'd picked this apartment together. Signed the lease on a rainy Thursday, celebrated with bad takeout on the floor because the furniture hadn't arrived yet. Small things. The kind that accumulate into a life. Dinner was good. They talked about a colleague's tenure dispute, about a student of Henry's who'd plagiarized an essay badly enough to be almost impressive in its audacity, about whether they should drive up to Lake Tahoe before the weather made it difficult. Alina told him about a paper she was revising, the argument that wasn't landing quite right yet. And Henry listened the way he did when he was actually listening, not waiting to speak, just following the thread. He asked one question that went straight to the problem. She sat back and looked at him. "That's it," she said. "I know. How did you get there that fast?" He shrugged, but she could see he was pleased. "You already had it. You were just talking around it." She refilled his glass and then her own. Outside the window, Reno had gone dark, and the first lights of the city had started up, the familiar grid of them spreading out toward the mountains. She'd lived here long enough that the view had stopped being scenery and become something she simply belonged to. She cleared the plates while Henry loaded the dishwasher. Their movements around the kitchen practiced and quiet. The small choreography of people who have shared a space long enough to stop narrating it. He handed her the wine glasses one at a time. She set them on the drying rack. "I'm going to read for a bit," she said. "I'll be in soon." She paused at the kitchen doorway and looked back at him. He was wiping down the counter, sleeves pushed up, the music still going low in the background. 14 years. An apartment in Reno. A program in Edinburgh she'd never attended. A career built on her own reliability. Her own early mornings. Her own faith that choosing this life meant it was worth choosing. Everything looked exactly as it should. Alina dried her hands on the dish towel and turned to close the kitchen window. The evening had cooled down fast, typical for high desert in September. Through the glass, she could see the parking lot of the apartment complex, the light already going bronze and thin. Henry was in the bedroom. She heard him open the closet, then close it. Open it again. The sound of hangers sliding against the rod. He was looking for something. She finished the wine and set the glass on the counter, running her finger along the rim where the lipstick had marked it. A habit Theo had once teased her about at a department dinner, saying she was the only person he knew who still wore red lipstick like it meant something. Henry came back into the kitchen wearing a different shirt. Not just different. New. It was a navy linen thing, tailored at the shoulders, the kind he usually dismissed as fussy. She'd never seen him in it. He had it on, unbuttoned at the cuffs, already rolling the sleeves up with the practiced movements of someone who'd done this exact action several times before. "You changed," she said. The other one had pasta sauce on it. He was looking at his phone now, the glow catching his jaw. "I think from lunch." She nodded. That made sense. He was careful about clothes. He was careful about everything. That was one of the things she'd liked about him, the precision. The way he marked papers with red ink in a script so clean it looked printed. The way he organized his books by publication date instead of alphabetically. And could justify the system in 5 sentences flat. The shirt, though, she turned back to the sink and ran water over the wine glass, watching it cloud under the heat. The water was too hot. She could feel it climbing toward her wrists, the edges of her palms. Henry walked to the bedroom again. She heard the dresser drawer, his drawer, the left one where he kept socks and underwear. It closed. She was still holding the wine glass under the water, the glass warming in her hands. Through the kitchen window, a neighbor she didn't know came out onto a balcony 2 floors up and shook out a rug. The dust caught the last of the light and hung there, suspended, before it fell. When Henry emerged again, he had his messenger bag over his shoulder. "Where are you going?" she asked, grading papers at the library. "Got a stack of midterms that need work. Might be late." He was checking his pockets now. Phone, keys, the small leather wallet he'd had since she met him. The ritual of departure. She knew it better than she knew her own hands. "It's Tuesday." "I know. You don't usually grade on Tuesdays." Henry stopped moving. Not much, just a pause, a breath held for half a second too long. Then he smiled. The smile was the correct smile, the one he used in committee meetings. It had a purpose to it, a shaped quality, like something made rather than felt. "I'm behind," he said. "Semester's moving fast. The library didn't close until midnight. The library was 3 blocks away." The library had good fluorescent light and a back room where faculty could reserve a table if they called ahead. She knew all of this because they had graded papers together there, sitting across from each other, their red pens synchronized in a kind of rhythm, marking up sentences, crossing out repetitions. Writing thesis? In the margins of confusion. She didn't ask if he'd called ahead. He kissed her, a fast thing, a practical thing, his hand briefly on her shoulder. The new shirt smelled like detergent and something underneath it that wasn't Henry. Not cologne. Something without a name. He pulled back before she could recognize it. "Don't wait up," he said. The door closed. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, the elevator arriving, the small hydraulic sound of it opening. She stood in the kitchen for another minute, the wine glass still in her hands, the water long since gone cold. Through the window, the dust from the rug had settled. The neighbor had gone back inside. Alina set the glass on the counter and walked to the bedroom. The closet was open an inch. She pulled it wider and looked at his hangers. The shirts were arranged from light to dark, a system he didn't talk about but maintained with his usual invisible precision. There was a gap where the navy shirt had been. She could see the empty hanger, the plastic rod where the plastic hook still held the shape of where something had been. She pushed the hangers aside, checking the pockets of his jackets on instinct. The way you do when you're looking for something you don't know how to name. Change. A. Receipt. A note. Her hands moved through the fabric with mechanical purpose. Nothing. Everything was clean. Everything was in order. She left the closet as it was and went to the living room. The evening had finished darkening outside the windows now. She turned on the table lamp beside the couch and sat down without turning on the television, without pouring another glass of wine. She picked up her phone. She put it back down. The apartment was quiet in the way it got when Henry wasn't there. Not a silence exactly, but an absence that took up space. The refrigerator hummed. The downstairs neighbors had something playing too loud, bass notes that came through the floor. She thought about the library. She thought about papers that needed grading. She thought about a shirt she'd never seen before, buttoned and ready like it had somewhere to be. Her hand reached for her phone again. She didn't pick it up. She couldn't sleep. At midnight, she was still in the living room chair, the television off, the apartment dark except for the city lights coming through the west-facing windows. The clock on her phone said 12:47. The library had closed 15 minutes ago. She picked up her phone and typed Henry's name into the search bar. Nothing new on his faculty page. She scrolled to his last email, sent at 1:30 p.m. To a graduate seminar about conference presentations. The tone was brisk, encouraging. She knew that tone. She used it too. The thought arrived without permission. She had never once seen Henry grade papers at the library on a Tuesday night. She stood and walked to the bedroom. The navy shirt was no longer on the empty hanger. She checked the laundry basket. Nothing there. His messenger bag was gone. His wallet was gone. His phone charger usually sat on the nightstand, and it was gone. The careful man who organized his books by publication date and marked papers in red ink and script so clean it looked printed had walked out of the apartment carrying something she could not inventory because she didn't know what to look for. Alina moved to the kitchen and poured wine. It was past 1 a.m. She sat at the table where they'd eaten dinner 3 hours ago, where Henry had identified the flaw in her argument without hesitation, where he had looked at her over pasta and said the semester was moving fast. The wine was cold and expensive, the kind she'd learned to choose in years that felt separate from this one. At 1:43 a.m., she opened her email. She typed the address of a hotel she barely knew existed, the Ellsworth, near the conference center 3 miles from campus. She searched the name with Henry's. Nothing. She searched just the hotel name and waited for the website to load. Rooms, rates, a bar and restaurant on the 2nd floor. She closed the laptop. The next morning, she called in sick. She'd never called in sick in 11 years. The department secretary offered to cancel her office hours. Alina said yes without explaining anything. She sat in the apartment until Henry texted at 8:47 a.m., graded until 2 a.m. Fell asleep in the car for an hour. Coming home now. She didn't respond. She showered. She chose her clothes carefully, gray trousers, a black turtleneck. The boots with the narrow heel. She made her face the way she made it for faculty meetings. No red lipstick. Nothing remarkable. She was 43 years old and had learned long ago how to look like nothing was burning. Henry opened the door at 9:15. He was still wearing the navy shirt. He moved toward her to kiss her, and she turned her head, reaching past him to the bathroom. In the mirror, she saw him register it, saw the small hesitation in his face before he said her name. She didn't answer. She emerged 15 minutes later with her bag over her shoulder. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Out, you called in sick." Yes, he was still wearing the navy shirt. The cuffs were rolled. She could smell the detergent again, and underneath it, something that was not Henry's soap. Not his shampoo. A woman's perfume. Something floral and expensive. "Alina, what's going on?" She moved past him toward the door. He stepped sideways to block her path, not aggressively. Henry was never aggressive, but with the quiet assumption that she would explain herself, because that's what they did. They explained. They clarified. They maintained the practiced kitchen choreography that had been working for 14 years. "Move," she said. He didn't move. "Talk to me." She looked at his face. She looked at the new navy shirt with the tailored shoulders and the cuffs rolled exactly the way someone else had probably rolled them. She looked at his hands, which were empty and clean and ringed with a wedding band that matched hers. And she understood that she was looking at someone else's husband. The man in front of her was not the man she'd married. Or worse, he was exactly the same man, and she'd simply never seen him clearly. She walked around him. He followed her into the hallway. "Alina, stop! You're scaring me!" She pressed the elevator button and waited. The hallway was empty, Tuesday morning in September, and the building was silent except for the sound of his breathing and hers, both moving too fast. "I'm not leaving," he said. "Tell me what's happening." The elevator arrived. She stepped inside. Through the closing doors, she saw his face, confused, afraid. Something underneath the fear that looked almost like calculation. The doors sealed shut, and she descended 11 floors without moving. She drove to campus. It was mid-morning, and the parking lot was half full. She walked to Morrison Hall, to the 3rd floor, to the office directory. Felix Marsh, graduate student. Medieval literature. The office was a converted storage closet in the east wing with a name placard that was still new. Still sticker white against the door. The office was locked. She stood in front of it for a moment, then walked downstairs to the main office. The department secretary, Janet, looked up from her desk. "Alina, I thought you were sick? I need Felix Marsh's class schedule." "Oh, Felix doesn't have office hours until Thursday. But I can. When does Felix have class today?" Janet typed. 11 o'clock. Morrison 106. Alina checked her phone, 10:34. She walked down the hallway, down the stairs, and positioned herself in the corridor across from Morrison 106. The classroom door was open. A few students were already inside. She waited against the wall, invisible in the way she'd become expert at being invisible, reliable, predictable, unremarkable. A voice in the department that nobody really heard anymore. At 10:58, a young woman rounded the corner carrying a canvas bag and 2 coffee cups. Alina recognized her from department events. 24, maybe 25. Dark hair. The kind of careless beauty that came from not yet understanding what beauty cost. The kind of youth that made everything it touched seem urgent and real. Behind her, 15 feet back, came Henry. He was looking at the woman's face with an expression Alina had never seen him use with her. It was not casual. It was not the face of a man performing a duty or maintaining a relationship. It was the face of a man watching someone he was entirely focused on loving. His eyes were tracking her mouth. His hand was reaching toward her back, not quite touching, hovering close enough to feel the proximity. The young woman turned to him and smiled. She transferred one of the coffee cups to her other hand. She reached for his hand with her free one. She laced her fingers through his and held it, not furtively, not in the quick grip of people hiding something, but in the settled, familiar way of 2 people who had been holding hands in Morrison Hall corridors and coffee shops and quiet parking lots for long enough that it no longer required conversation. She pulled him slightly forward. They moved together into the classroom. His hand remained laced with hers until the last possible moment. He released her fingers slowly. She looked back at him. A glance that was pure tenderness, pure knowing. He sat in the back of the classroom. She took her position at the front. The door swung closed. The corridor was empty except for Alina, who was still standing against the wall with her hands at her sides and her face arranged in the expression of someone waiting for nothing in particular. She didn't move. She watched the closed door of Morrison 106 for 3 minutes, 4-5. No feeling reached her. No tears, no anger, no betrayal. Instead, there was only a sudden and absolute clarity about what she was. A placeholder, a woman who had deferred everything for something that was never actually hers. She turned and walked toward her office. She sat at her desk. She opened her laptop. She found the password she'd written down years ago, the one Henry didn't know she had for his university email account. She typed it in. The account opened. She scrolled through the sent folder. 3 months back. 4 months. 5 months. There, July 15th. A message to Felix Marsh with no subject line. I've been thinking about you since the moment I saw you. She clicked the next one. The conference. You understand what I mean, don't you? And then, I can't keep doing this without letting you know. I don't want to hide this. The dates progressed. June to July to August. Through the month when he'd kissed her goodbye and driven to work and marked papers and made lemon pasta and held her in the dark of their bedroom. Through all of it. She found a message from Felix. Henry, I'm scared. What if she finds out? His response came back within minutes. She won't. I'm careful. And even if she did, I'm not sure I care anymore. Alina's hands were steady. She was not shaking. She felt herself arrive at a decision the way she'd learned to make decisions years ago. Completely, irrevocably, with no room for doubt or negotiation. She understood that she had spent 14 years building a life that had ended precisely 3 months ago, when Henry had seen Felix Marsh and decided that Alina's existence no longer mattered enough to protect. She closed the email. She stood. She walked to the office door and locked it. She sat back down, and in the locked quiet of the space where she'd taught comparative literature and received a review calling her the most reliable voice in the department, she opened her phone and typed the name Andre Romelli into the search bar. The attorney's office was 2 blocks away. Andre Romelli's office was 2 blocks from the university, on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and photocopier toner. Alina climbed the stairs without checking the directory twice. She'd already looked up his case history the night before, sitting at the kitchen counter with her second glass of wine untouched beside her, her reading glasses on, her face perfectly still. Romelli was a compact man in his early 50s with a neat gray beard and the kind of stillness that came from spending decades in rooms where people fell apart. He didn't offer her coffee. She didn't ask for any. She sat across from his desk in a chair that was slightly too low and did not adjust herself in it. "Nevada is a community property state," he said. "Everything acquired during the marriage splits evenly unless there's a written agreement otherwise." "There isn't," Alina said. He looked at her over the top of his glasses. "You've been married 14 years. Yes, and you want to proceed. I want to understand what proceeding looks like," she said. "Then, I want to proceed," he told her. She listened. When he finished, she asked 3 questions. All of them precise. None of them about Henry by name. When she stood to leave, Romelli said, "Most people I see in this chair spend the first meeting crying." Alina picked up her bag. "I cried last night," she said. "In the car. For about 4 minutes." She paused at the door. "I don't think I'll need to again." She walked back to campus along the long route, past the stretch of elms that were just starting to turn. September in Reno was a slow burn, the light going golden, the air still warm enough to pretend it was summer. She walked with her hands in her coat pockets, her heels clicking on the pavement, and she did not think about the apartment, or the lemon pasta, or the practiced kitchen choreography. She thought about Edinburgh. She thought about the program letter, which she still had somewhere in a folder in the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, behind her tax returns. She had deferred twice, and the window had closed, and she had told herself for 14 years that it was the right choice, that the life she'd built here was proof enough. She did not think about whether she'd been right. She thought about the folder. She thought about the letter still being there. She stopped on the corner outside Morrison Hall and stood for a moment with her face tipped slightly upward. A student passed her close enough to brush her sleeve and said, "Oh, sorry, Professor." And she smiled and said no problem, and the student kept walking, and Alina stood there 1 more second and then walked on. The preparation took 9 days. She opened a personal checking account at Liberty Mutual Savings on a Wednesday morning before her 10 o'clock lecture, using her salary, which was deposited into a joint account, and which she now understood, with Romelli's voice in her ear, was legally hers to act on. The teller was a young woman with hoop earrings who completed the transaction without comment. Alina signed the forms with her full name, Alina Vasquez, as she'd always signed. Not Alina Vasquez Brower, the way Henry had suggested when they married and she'd quietly declined. She had not made a production of it. She had simply continued being Alina Vasquez. She stood in the lobby afterward and looked at the account number on the paper receipt. 14 years. A joint account, a joint lease, a shared parking permit, a Netflix subscription, a grocery store loyalty card. It didn't take as long as she'd expected to begin separating herself from it. That was the thing no one told you. You could build a life with someone for 14 years and discover, when you began carefully dismantling it, that the architecture was less load-bearing than you thought. She photographed Henry's emails in full on her laptop, naming each file by date. There were 41 messages between July 15th and the present. She read them once all the way through in her office with the door closed, and then she did not read them again. She knew what she needed to know. What she did not need to do was live inside them. Henry wrote, "I've been thinking about you since the moment I saw you." Henry wrote, "I'm not sure I care anymore." Felix wrote, "What if she finds out?" He'd written back, "She won't." Alina closed the laptop lid. She sat in her office for 3 minutes looking at the framed Nabokov quote on her wall. Existence is a series of footnotes to a vast, obscure, unfinished masterpiece. And then she opened the laptop again and opened a new document and began drafting her paper revision. The work was still the work. She would not let him take that too. On the 6th day, she called the ethics committee coordinator, not as a committee member, but as someone flagging a concern to be routed appropriately. She gave no names in that call. She said only that a graduate student she knew had mentioned a situation she might want to understand better, and asked whether there was a private resource she could point her toward. There was. She passed the information to Felix Marsh that same afternoon, not in person, not by email, but by printing the university's graduate student rights document from the publicly available handbook and sliding it into Felix's departmental mailbox in an unmarked envelope. Felix was 24 years old and was being advised by a man who had, in private emails, described his wife as a problem he'd stopped caring about. Felix Marsh had not created Henry, but she had choices available to her that she hadn't been told about, and Alina believed, as a matter of principle she'd held since her own graduate program, that information withheld from someone with less power than you was its own kind of betrayal. Whether Felix used it or not was Felix's decision. Alina did not wait to find out. She had her own timeline. On the 9th day, Henry noticed. He came home from a late faculty meeting and found Alina at the kitchen table with a stack of papers and her reading glasses on, marking in pencil. He set his bag down, poured himself water from the tap, and stood at the counter. He was still wearing the navy shirt. He'd worn it 3 times in the past 9 days, and she'd watched him pack it and unpack it, and she'd said nothing, and each time he'd offered some account of his evening, grading a colleague, a department thing, she'd listened and said okay, and asked no follow-up questions. And she'd watched his relief bloom and then immediately contract, because her calm was making him nervous. "How's the revision coming?" he said. "Good," she said, without looking up. He stood there. She could feel him standing there the way you feel weather changing before the temperature drops, a pressure shift, something atmospheric. "You seem," he started. "I'm just tired," she said. He nodded. He opened the refrigerator, closed it, opened it again, took out leftover chicken in a container. He stood at the counter eating it cold, directly from the container, which he'd never done before. He was watching her. She turned a page. "Alina, is everything okay?" She looked up then. She took off her reading glasses and set them on the table and looked at him with clear, steady eyes and said, "It's a busy week. I'm fine." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded again, slowly, and took his container to the living room to eat in front of his laptop, which he also had never done before. She listened to the couch cushion absorb his weight. She put her reading glasses back on. The filing happened on the 11th day. Romelli's paralegal emailed her at 9:47 a.m. The petition had been filed with the 2nd Judicial District Court of the state of Nevada. Henry would be served. Alina read the email in her car in the faculty parking lot, engine off, the September sun making the windshield warm under her palm where she'd rested her hand. She sat there for 60 seconds. Then she picked up her bag and walked to her 10 o'clock class and taught for 50 minutes on the competing translation philosophies of Nabokov and Benjamin. And 3 students participated in a way that made her genuinely interested in what they were thinking. And she left the classroom 20 minutes later feeling something she hadn't felt in 9 days, which was close to ordinary. Henry was served on a Thursday at 12:30 p.m. She wasn't there. She learned about it from Romelli, who told her that the process server had found him outside Morrison Hall between classes. She was in her office at the time, meeting with a student about a late paper. She excused herself to check her phone when it buzzed, saw Romelli's name, read the single-line text, and put her phone face down on her desk. "Sorry," she said to her student. "You were saying about the 3rd chapter." He called her 4 times between 12:41 and 1:15 p.m. She was still in the meeting. She let all 4 calls go to voicemail. At 1:23, he texted, "We need to talk." "Please then, Alina." "Then, I'm coming to your office." She stepped out into the hallway at 1:28 and stood by the window at the end of the corridor. And when she saw him coming, still in his jacket, moving fast, the navy shirt again, the messenger bag slapping his hip. She did not feel afraid. She felt the hallway around her with great precision. The water stain on the ceiling tile, the sound of a printer running behind a closed door. The particular quality of afternoon light that came through that north-facing window and fell in a long stripe across the linoleum. He stopped in front of her. His face was working. She had known this face for 14 years. Known it across a dinner table, across a pillow, across 14 September mornings. And what she saw now was a man who had been moving through his days with absolute confidence in his own invisibility, and had just discovered, at 12:30 in the afternoon outside Morrison Hall, that he had never been invisible at all. "You filed," he said. "Yes," without he stopped. Swallowed without saying anything to me. "I'm saying it now." "Alina," his voice dropped. "We can talk about this. Whatever you think, I don't think anything," she said. "I know what I know." Something moved across his face. Not guilt. Guilt comes before discovery. This was something worse, the retroactive understanding of how long she'd known. And everything she'd said and done while knowing it. And the calculation of how comprehensively he'd been wrong. "How long?" he said. She let the question stand in the air for a moment. "Long enough." "Felix is a—" "Don't," she said quietly. He didn't. 3 days later, she received a letter from Romelli flagging a complication. Henry had retained his own attorney. A man named Calloway, who specialized in asset disputes, and Calloway had raised the question of the Edinburgh deferral, specifically, had requested documentation suggesting that Alina's decision to decline the doctoral program had been mutual and had constituted a shared marital investment in Henry's career trajectory, which might complicate her claim on the assets Henry argued were tied to his own professional development. Romelli called her to explain it. She listened to the whole explanation. When he finished, she said, "Check my intake documents. The third attachment." There was a pause. She heard him typing. She had included in the folder of documents she'd brought to their first meeting, along with the bank statements, the printed emails, the lease, and a complete record of her professional history, the original deferral letter from Edinburgh, and beneath it, a letter she had written to the program director at the time of the second deferral. A personal letter, formal in tone, explaining the circumstances. In that letter, she had been clear. The decision was hers, made independently, and she had asked that it be placed in her file. She had kept a copy. She had kept it for 14 years, in the same bottom drawer as the tax returns, without ever quite knowing why. Perhaps because Edinburgh had felt, even then, like something she hadn't finished grieving, and the letter had been her way of putting her name on the loss. "I have it," Romelli said. "I know," she said. The complication resolved within a week. Calloway's approach evaporated. Henry's attorney did not raise the Edinburgh argument again. She heard about the ethics complaint filing from a colleague who mentioned it in passing in the faculty lounge. A complaint had been filed regarding an advisor-advisee relationship in the English department. The department chair had been notified. The colleague raised it with the mild, practiced neutrality academics use when discussing institutional procedure as social currency. Alina poured herself coffee and said, "I heard something about that." "Messy business," the colleague said. "Yes," she agreed. Henry came to the apartment on a Sunday to collect his things, as arranged through Romelli's office. He arrived at 10 a.m. And she was not there. She had her own arrangement, a prior agreement with Romelli about the terms, and she had gone for a long walk along the river path she'd been meaning to try for 2 years and had never gotten around to. She walked for an hour and a half, alone in the September morning, the river low and glinting, the elms fully gold now. She bought coffee from a cart near the park and drank it standing on a footbridge looking at the water. Her phone did not buzz. She had nothing left to wait for. When she returned, the apartment was half empty in ways she noticed, and half empty in ways she didn't. His books were gone from the left side of the bookshelf. The kitchen felt larger. The closet door was closed, and when she opened it, the arrangement of her own clothes had not changed. But the dark half of the spectrum, the charcoal jackets, the black wool coats, felt less pressured. Somehow, more room to breathe. On the kitchen counter, he'd left his key. She picked it up. She held it in her palm for a moment. It was a plain brass key with a small blue rubber tag she'd bought in a set of 4 at a hardware store 8 years ago. And she'd given him 1 and kept 2 and left the 4th at her office in case she locked herself out. She still had the 4th key. She had always had it. She set his key in the ceramic dish on the counter where she kept loose change and put on the kettle. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 9 days after the filing, 3 days after the Sunday that cleared the apartment. She was in her office at 8:40 a.m., 20 minutes before her 9 o'clock class, arranging graded papers on her desk the way she always did. Her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was Edinburgh. She looked at the phone for 1 ring. Then she picked it up. Professor Vasquez? This is Dr. Cairns from the Comparative Literature faculty at the University of Edinburgh. I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient time. A pause, the slight warmth of a practiced apology. I understand you may have inquired about our visiting scholar fellowship. She had. Quietly, 8 days ago, through the faculty research portal. A visiting fellowship. 1 semester. She had not told anyone. You're not calling at an inconvenient time, she said. The paperwork was straightforward, Dr. Cairns said. There would be some administrative steps. She would hear from their faculty coordinator by the end of the week. Thank you, she said. She set the phone down on her desk. Outside her window, the elms along the quad were almost completely gold. A student crossed the path below with their head down, moving fast, jacket open. The September light was doing what September light in Nevada did this close to the end of the month. Sitting low and long and copper-colored, making everything look briefly like the best version of itself. Alina put her reading glasses on. She opened her class notes. She had 20 minutes, and she was going to use them. She had work to do. The petition was filed on a Tuesday. Henry was served on Thursday at 12:30 p.m. outside Morrison Hall between his 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock classes. Alina did not watch him read the papers. She stayed in her office with the door closed, grading a stack of essays on the second sex while students walked past in the hallway. One of them knocked. She said, "Come in." A sophomore asked about thesis statements. Alina circled a sentence and explained it twice, slowly, and the student nodded and left. She returned to the essays. Henry called 4 times between 12:41 and 1:17 p.m. She did not answer. His 4th voicemail was 9 seconds of breathing, then nothing. He was gone from the apartment when she returned that evening. The navy shirt hung in the closet, pressed and clean. His toothbrush remained in the bathroom cup. She stood in the doorway of their bedroom for perhaps a minute, then went to the kitchen and boiled water for pasta. On Friday, Theo Lindvist appeared in her open doorway at 2:45 p.m. He held a coffee cup and did not sit down. "I heard," he said. Alina looked up from her computer. "Yes, do you need anything?" "No," he nodded. He turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, you've always been the reliable one." She did not respond. He left the door open as he went. Romelli's office called on Monday. The judge had granted a preliminary injunction freezing the joint accounts. Henry had attempted to move funds on Friday evening. The paralegal said this word, attempted, with a tone that suggested it was already over. Alina listened. The paralegal asked if she needed anything else. She said no, and hung up. The apartment felt smaller after the first week. Not smaller in space, smaller in possibility. She noticed things that had never bothered her before. The way Henry had organized the books, which she now began to rearrange by author's birth year. She noticed the mark on the ceiling from water damage in 2019 that he had said he would fix. She noticed the thermostat, which had always been set to his preference. She changed it to hers. On the 10th day, she called Romelli's office to ask about the timeline. The paralegal said these things take time. Alina said she understood. The paralegal said most people who leave end up proving they wanted to leave a long time ago. Alina said thank you and ended the call. She had not returned to the Copper Spoon since the affair began, though it was 4 blocks from the university. On the 12th day, she walked there at lunch. The hostess recognized her. Alina ordered the roasted salmon and a glass of white wine. She sat by the window and watched students cross the plaza outside, their backpacks heavy, their faces focused on nothing in particular. The wine was cold. The salmon was exactly as she remembered it. She finished both. Henry's colleagues stopped calling by the end of the 2nd week. The department email list no longer included him by the 3rd. Theo mentioned in passing that Henry had requested a leave of absence. Alina nodded. She did not ask for details. The Edinburgh letter was still in her filing cabinet behind the tax returns. On a Saturday morning in late September, she opened the bottom drawer and felt the edge of the folder. She did not pull it out. She simply knew it was there. She closed the drawer and made breakfast, eggs and toast, which she ate standing at the counter while reading an article on Simone de Beauvoir's unpublished notes. Felix Marsh stopped attending seminars in the 4th week. Alina did not know if she had withdrawn from the program or transferred advisement. She did not ask Theo. She did not search the university portal. The information arrived without seeking, in a passing comment from a graduate student, in the absence of a particular face in the hallway outside her office. In the way the seminar room felt less crowded on Thursdays. The air simply changed, and she breathed it without noticing. The separation agreement was signed in Romelli's office on the 37th day. Alina read it once, initialed where required, and signed her name as Alina Vasquez. Henry's signature was already on the page. Neat, deliberate, unchanged. The paralegal witnessed it. Alina left the document on the desk and stood to leave. Romelli asked if she wanted to keep a copy. She said no, and then yes, and he handed her a folder. She carried it back to campus under a clear sky. The new semester began in January. Alina taught a seminar on 20th century women writers. 23 students enrolled. She stood at the podium before 9 o'clock and arranged her graded papers in the order she would distribute them. The classroom smelled like rain and chalk and the particular staleness of buildings heated in winter. A student in the 3rd row raised her hand before Alina had even begun. "Is it true you're a Beauvoir scholar?" Alina looked at her. The girl was young, attentive, waiting. "I've read most of her work," Alina said. "I want to write my thesis on the second sex." "Is that something you supervise?" Alina felt something shift in her chest. Not pain, not quite relief. Something that moved like air through an open window. "Yes," she said. "That's something I can do." The student smiled and pulled out a notebook. Alina began the lecture. She moved through the material without notes, her voice steady and clear, the way it had always been. Outside, November light fell across the Reno campus in long, clean angles. By the time the class ended, the light had moved. She gathered her papers and walked back to her office, and when she opened the door, it was just a room, a desk, a chair, a window facing west. She sat down and thought of nothing at all.
If this one stayed with you, share it with someone who'd understand. New episode tomorrow.